Think about the last time someone really noticed you. Not just a quick hey in passing, and not someone liking a post. I mean, they actually saw you, paid attention, listened, asked how you were doing, and meant it. Now flip that around. When was the last time you did that for someone else? Not out of obligation, not because you had to, but because you chose to stop, slow down, and make another person feel like they actually mattered in that moment. Here's why I'm asking. Because there's a growing problem in our culture that doesn't get nearly enough attention. And it's not about money or politics or even religion, although those are big problems. The problem I'm talking about is that people are quietly disappearing. Not physically, socially. And there's a term for it. Social death. Welcome to another bonus edition of the MTB Podcast, a segment of the weekly episode that I call Afterthoughts. This is my favorite part of these weekly presentations because it gives me a chance to dig a little deeper into something that came up during the main episode. Social death is what happens when someone is still alive, still breathing, still going through the motions of daily life, but they're no longer really seen, known, or connected to anyone in a meaningful way. And here's the part that should get our attention. This isn't rare. Right here in Michigan, where I live, about 4 out of every 10 people report feeling lonely on a regular basis. In some areas, it's closer to half. That's not a handful of people having a bad day. That's a pattern. It's a landscape. It's a valley. And if we're being honest, most of us walk past it every day without even realizing it. Because loneliness doesn't always look dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It tends to be quiet and subtle. It looks like routine. It can look like independence. It even looks like I'm fine. Until it doesn't. So tonight, I want to explore a question that I think sits right at the heart of what it means to be human. If people can slowly fade out of connection while they're still alive, what does it actually take to bring them back? Not with miracles, not with grand gestures, but with something far more ordinary and far more powerful. So let's dive into that in this episode of Afterthoughts. Okay, now let's think back to the image from our reading from Ezekiel this week, which was the Valley of Dry Bones. It's one of those images that can kind of stick with you. Not just because it's dramatic, but because it's sort of unsettling. And a whole landscape filled with what used to be people, now reduced to scattered remains. No movement, no connection, certainly no recognition. But here's the part that often gets missed. Those bones aren't just dead. They're forgotten. That's a very different kind of problem. As I mentioned, there's a term in sociology for this. It's called social death. It describes a condition where a person is still biologically alive, right? Heart beating, lungs working, but they've effectively disappeared from the social world. No one sees them, no one knows them, no one is really interacting with them in any kind of meaningful way. They exist, but they're not fully alive in what I would call any sort of human sense. Now, here's where this gets uncomfortable, especially for us, because this isn't some ancient metaphor. This is happening right now, all around us. Right here in Michigan, about 41% of people report feeling lonely at least some of the time. That's higher than the national average. And in the Detroit metro area, that number climbs to nearly 46%, one of the highest rates in the country. Think about that for a second. Almost half the people around me are walking through life feeling disconnected. That's not a fringe issue, and it's happening all over the country, potentially all over the world. And that's not a few people having a bad week, right? That is a landscape of trouble. That is a valley of dry bones. So if we're going to take humanism seriously, if we're really focused on this life, not some hypothetical next one, if we're focused on improving this life, then we have to ask a pretty direct question. What is our responsibility to each other in the face of that kind of isolation? Because maybe the real moral challenge isn't about what happens after we die. Maybe the real moral challenge is about making sure people don't experience a kind of death while they're still here. Now let's talk about how this actually happens. Because loneliness doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It gets built just quietly and systematically. One of the biggest contributors, especially here in the Midwest, is the way we've designed our communities. I mean, think about a typical suburban day. You wake up, you get cleaned up, you get in your car, you drive to work, you come home, you pull into your garage, the garage door closes behind you. And that might be the extent of your interaction with the outside world. And if you work remotely, if you work from home, you won't even get that much interaction. We've created environments where it's entirely possible to go through an entire day or multiple days without any sort of meaningful human contact. We've created that. Everything is structured around movement, efficiency, privacy, but not connection. There's actually research showing that car-dependent environments are strongly associated with higher levels of loneliness, especially compared to walkable areas where people just naturally run into each other, like parks or cafes, sidewalks, community spaces. That just makes sense. In other words, we've built places that are incredibly convenient and quietly isolating. Now, here's the part that really matters. Loneliness isn't just an emotional issue. Loneliness is a very biological one. It's a biological problem. Chronic isolation has been shown to be as damaging to your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. I mean, that's not just a poetic flourish. That's measurable. Being lonely causes measurable biological harm. So in Michigan, about 1 in 4 older adults don't have enough close friends. And if someone is already struggling with their mental health, that number jumps to nearly half. So when we talk about loneliness, we're not talking about someone feeling a little sad on a Friday night. We're talking about something that actively wears down the human body. It's a slow erosion of our health and well-being, a kind of living decay. A modern version of being wrapped in those burial cloths we talked about in the reading about Lazarus. Now, let's take a turn that might feel a little uncomfortable for some people. Because there's a tension here that we don't talk about enough. Many of our cultural and religious conversations focus intensely on protecting biological life, beginning of life issues, end of life issues, huge debates about that. Oh, there's massive political energy around all of that shit. But what about everything in between? What about the quality of that life you're trying to protect? What about whether someone is known, seen, supported, connected? Because here's the reality. We will spend enormous amounts of money and energy to keep a body alive, but we often spend very little ensuring that the person inside that body is actually living. In Michigan, about 34% of older adults only interact with friends once or twice a month or less. once or twice a month. That's not a social life. That's barely social maintenance. So here's a question we have to wrestle with. What does it actually mean to value life? Seriously, is it just about biological survival? Or does valuing life include things like dignity, connection, belonging, being recognized as a person in a community? From a humanist perspective, the answer is very clear. Life isn't just about being born. It's about being known. It's about being part of something. Life is about having people who would notice if you disappeared. That's what it means to be unbound. When in the main presentation, the main episode, when we talked about Lazarus needing to be unbound, when he came forth from the tomb, Jesus said, "Unbind him." Right? That's not just being alive, it's about being reconnected. So if that's the problem, what do we actually do about it? Because it's easy to look at statistics like this and just feel overwhelmed. But I don't think the solution starts with massive systems. I think the solution can start small, and I think it starts personal. What we're really talking about here is something I would call radical hospitality. And not in the sense of throwing the perfect dinner party every Friday night, but in the sense of intentionally making space for people in your life. And here's a simple framework to think about. Let's call it our unbinding protocol. So first, recognition. You have to notice people. Learn their names. Use their names. Acknowledge their presence. Make eye contact. Start conversations. It sounds basic, but it's amazing how many people go through entire days without being truly seen. So we start with recognition. Second is presence. This is the Jesus wept moment from the story. You don't fix everything. You don't offer advice right away. You just show up. And here's something interesting. About 25% of older adults say they want more contact with their friends. They're not asking for miracles. They're just asking for a bit more connection. We can do that for each other by being present. Third, integration. Help move someone from the sidelines back into participation with the community. Invite them to something. Include them in a conversation. Give them a role, a purpose, a place. Because people don't just need to be visited. They need to be included. And yes, there's also a bigger structural piece to this. There's a growing idea called social prescribing, where doctors don't just prescribe medication, they prescribe connection. They refer patients to community groups and libraries or social activities because the root issue isn't always medical. Sometimes it's isolation, and the treatment is human connection. So let's bring this all together. We don't need to wait for some external force to open the graves of isolation. Those graves are already open. We walk past them every day. The coworker who eats lunch alone. The neighbor you wave to but have never spoken with. The family member who's quietly drifting away. The person in your life who hasn't been fully seen in a long time. Those are all open graves of isolation. The question isn't whether the valley of dry bones exists. It does. The question is whether we're willing to step into it. Because reanimation isn't supernatural. It's relational. Reanimating a life happens when people decide to notice each other, They decide to sit with each other, to include each other in things. It happens when they help remove the things that keep someone else stuck. So here's the question I'd like to leave you with. Who in your valley is starting to dry up? And what would it look like for you to be the breath that reanimates them? Let me close with this thought from Helen Keller, which is a quote I used a while ago. Alone we can do so little. Together we can do so much. It's not just a nice quote, it's a reality check. Because if loneliness is a shared problem, then connection has to be a shared solution. And the good news is, that's something we can actually do. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Afterthoughts. If you want to keep up on everything I'm doing, please head over to thecodaproject.com and subscribe to my newsletter. You'll get notifications whenever I publish anything, and I'll also keep you updated on the weekly live streams of mythologizing the Bible. If you subscribe for free over at thecodaproject.com, you'll start receiving my publication called The Weekly Compass. This is a brief guide on a single core value. Think of it as a mini lesson plan for personal growth. It's perfect for families, students, and adults because I include discussion questions designed for each age group. As a subscriber, you'll also have access to the Guide to Kitchen Table Activism, which is a detailed resource designed to help you be politically active from your own home. The guide explains why activism is important, the philosophy behind kitchen table activism, and the foundational values it supports before laying out how to use the tools you have to make your voice heard. It provides tools, tactics, and templates for you to use, and it only takes about 15 minutes a week. If you care about our democracy, our country, and our world, then I encourage you to check it out. While you're at it, make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you'll start receiving my newsletter called The Kitchen Table Activist. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, remember to question everything, keep what's good, and live what matters.